Thank you for having me back. No one barred me from coming in, so I figured I didn't disappoint you the first time, so let's see if I can do it the second. Yes, today is even more terra-firming for me with the question of the Northern Triangle and the United States and the question of immigration. And for those not super familiar, the Northern Triangle is used to refer to the three countries of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, which you see behind me here. That would be Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Why the Northern Triangle? That's actually a bit disputed. Some say because it's the triangle where the three countries meet as a border. Some say because it's if you look at the entirety of the Central American Peninsula, sort of the Northern Triangle of the three countries there. And historically, they share a lot of characteristics, environmentally, geographically, but also in terms of population, right? There's sort of, you have even before Europeans arrived, you have Mayan and other large urban indigenous groups who live in that part of Central America, whereas once you get down to Nicaragua and Costa Rica, you don't really have those types of civilizations. You have indigenous peoples, but not on the scale of the Mayans. So there's sort of a cultural history here that unites this region as well, well even before the Europeans arrived. And we're going today I really want to spend time getting into the questions, sort of the interrelations between violence, immigration, and weak states in Central America. But in order to understand that, again, I'm a historian, so I always do this, but the historical context matters here, right? That with Spanish colonization, the Spanish presence in this area is not very strong. That the entirety of Central America is called the Kingdom of Guatemala, and it's just a part of the Viceroyalty of New Spain, which encompasses Mexico, as well as the Caribbean and the Philippines. So there's not really ever a strong colonial state in this region to begin with compared to other parts of Latin America. And then with independence, it's such a marginalized region that while the rest of Spanish America fights for its independence in civil wars that last 11 to 20 or 14 years rather, there's no war for Central American independence. They just sort of sit there while Mexico is fighting its war for independence. Mexico finally gets its independence in 1821, and Central America says, all right, we're out. And they leave Mexico and form their own confederation, and then become sort of these independent nations by the 1840s. And throughout that period, the thing that will really define all of Central America, and especially the Northern Triangle, is the sort of presence of weak states and a small oligarchy of officials who basically run the government in their own interests at the expense of the masses. So that well up to the present, rates of inequality that we will return to here later, rates of illiteracy, unequal land distribution, all of these are factors that sort of have colonial roots, but that endure and sort of fuel the question of immigration up to the present, right? So that in one way to understand the very long-term historical trajectory of why these immigration rates have changed in the last several years is because of the failure across centuries to address a lot of these inequalities and to sort of leave the masses in rather difficult positions, precarious positions for survival. And then further compounding this, and the place where the United States, like why the United States? Why not just migrate to Mexico or Colombia? But another factor that sort of shapes this is the US plays no small role in destabilizing the region as well, right? That you sort of have two major waves of US involvement in Central America and the Caribbean in the 20th century that will be direct factors as well in fostering these conditions further, and especially by the end of the 20th century, sort of creating a lot of those transportation networks to the United States and back and forth. And the first of those stages is really the sort of age of empire, right? That begins with the Spanish-American War in 1898, and the U.S. acquires Puerto Rico and occupies the Philippines and Cuba. And age of empire is not used in a pejorative term in this sense because that's what people at the time were advocating for, right? That when you look at like William McKinley or the famous White Man's Burden poem by Rudyard Kipling, they're actually saying the U.S. needs its own empire. So we do tend to treat Central America in this fashion and perpetuate those systems of government in which a tiny number of landholding elites remain in power while the masses are kept in poverty and in illiteracy. So this is a quick map. The U.S. presence, we tend to think like, oh, the United States is isolationist until World War II. And it is with regards to Europe, but it isn't with regards to Central America. So that it's, we occupied Nicaragua from 1909 to 1933, where we have Marines on the ground. That the United States occupies Haiti from 1915 to 1934, the Dominican Republic from 1916 to 1924, Cuba from 1898 to 1902, 1906 to 1909, 1917 to 1922. and even one of the countries in the Northern Triangle, right? That we don't occupy Honduras, but we invade and temporarily restabilize their politics for them in ways that we deem best fit in 1903, 1907, 1911, 1912, 1919, 1924, 1925. That this very much has a destabilizing effect on politics and society in these countries at this time, and it's primarily for business reasons, right? You have groups like the United Fruit Company and banana production there. It's a profitable business for U.S. companies, so it's the case of sort of this Taftian dollar diplomacy operating in the Central American region. But that's not going to do much to really help improve political stability or have governments that are responsible to the people. And eventually, by the late policy under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, where we try to sort of, as the name suggests, be better neighbors, right? That it's more, we stop treating and talking about Latin American countries as children that need U.S. guidance, and we refer to them as sister nations, that we're working together as siblings. But even then, we continue to support dictators. So you'll have dictators in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, in Honduras, in Guatemala, all of whom enjoy U.S. support from the 1930s up through World War II. And eventually, you'll get this wave of democracy in Central America and in Latin America more generally. Guatemala has its first presidential election ever in 1944. And you get a president named Juan Jose Arevalo, who begins to try to reform and address a lot of these inequalities. He starts to build, he builds more libraries. The number of libraries goes from about 3 to about 700 in the country. He increases the medical clinics available. He tries to begin to address some of these issues. But the problem will be that this also is going to occur in the context of the Cold War. So you have in 1944, there are only 4 Latin American countries that are technically democracies. In 1948, there will be 4 countries that aren't democracies. But by the 1950s, the backsliding has returned to undemocratic regimes, and the U.S. will once again sort of be using a geopolitical game in the Cold War to become heavily involved in Central America. The one sort of precursor to this will be in Guatemala, again, one of our countries of the Northern Triangle, where they have a second presidential election in 1950, and that president is basically a nationalist, but he wants to initiate land reform, and it ends up, the short version, I can answer some questions, but the short version is he goes after the United Fruit Company's land, and the United States intervenes. There's a CIA-backed coup that overthrows him in 1954 and interrupts that reform program that had begun 10 years earlier. And there will be a couple of presidents imposed on Guatemala, but by 1960, the masses who are fed up with this system and who had the promise of hope of reform given to them and then taken away, they will rise up in a guerrilla warfare. But you'll have a civil war in Guatemala from 1960 to 1996. And it sort of fits and starts throughout the 1960s and 70s, but by the 1980s, the Cold War has fully reached Latin America, and this is where the Northern Triangle is really affected. Because you have sort of this context of combating communism and combating leftist forces, the U.S. government will back a number of dictators in increasingly untenable positions. That we support the, well, actually I'll come back to that here in a second here. So you see this escalation of violence occurring, and it's even occurring by the late 70s, and you have a very famous case in El Salvador as a particular example that I'll highlight here. You have even the degree of unwillingness of governments to respond to the needs of the masses is evident in 1980, when you have the Archbishop of El Salvador, the highest Catholic official in the country. And he had been fairly conservative, but once he's appointed Archbishop and he starts to go out and see all the people in El Salvador, he realizes how impoverished and unequal it is in the countryside, he begins to speak on their behalf. And he draws very much on, sort of the Gospels and says, Jesus didn't say, "Blessed are the rich." It was quite clear on this message of, the Sermon on the Mount is not a lot of gray area in there. And so he begins to advocate for the poor, but this ruffles the feathers of the elites enough that there will be a death squad that will gun him down at a mass in March of 1980. And he had sort of been the last of the elements keeping El Salvador from devolving into complete and total anarchy and violence. And so with his assassination, he's actually right there, he's just been shot. This sort of ushers in this wave of violence in El Salvador. So they're in a civil war from 1980, phase of civil war in the 80s, that you'll have a general named Efraín Ríos Montt come to power in 1982. He sort of seizes power from another general. And in the Guatemalan Civil War, 250,000 people killed. But in the 15 months of Ríos Montt's government, 75,000 of those murders occurred. And it's almost entirely indigenous peoples. It's a genocidal campaign, effectively, because he's targeting indigenous populations. But this is happening with US backing, right? That you can see here with Reagan and Rios Montt meeting together, because Reagan has really sort of embraced this late Cold War approach of the Cold War must be fought. We must expel communism from everywhere we can in order to try to outspend and force the Soviet Union into collapse, which in that agenda he's successful, right? But it comes at some expense, because what you end up having in Central America, whether it's in Guatemala or El Salvador, where we are backing and training death squads who are destabilizing the government and the countryside, or in Honduras, where they don't actually have a civil war, they see an opening, because there's also the Contras and Sandinistas in the civil war in Nicaragua, and Honduras is between all of these countries. So their head of the army is happy to have the US work with him and basically serve as a base for operations into the neighboring countries. And so they'll just crack down on any kind of resistance before it can emerge. You have a couple hundred people kidnapped and disappeared by the government in the 1980s. And all of this then will set the stage for this very destabilized set of governments in the Northern Triangle that don't do much to really address any of the needs of the people. And when the people begin to fight for those needs, they're met with extreme violence. That of those 250,000 dead in Guatemala, 93% died at the hands of government forces. 3% died at the hands of leftist guerrillas. And this isn't to measure whether leftist guerrillas' causes were just or not. That's up for everyone to decide for themselves. But the sheer total, this is a very disproportionate violence. And it's not coincidental that these civil wars all end. Actually, I'll jump over that because it's graphic enough. It's not coincidence that the civil wars all end around the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? The Salvadoran civil wars, they have a ceasefire that is trying to work out the deals of the peace agreement. And Nicaragua, you have the Contra War from 1979 to 1990, and then that ends. But so that sort of stabilizes things a bit in Central America in terms of violence, or at least state-sponsored violence. But it doesn't necessarily address some of these deeper issues. That you have, if anything, a new culture of impunity, that those who commit most of these human rights violations, on the left or the right, never face trial. The oligarchs return to power having never really been punished or suffered the consequences of this violence because they've been forced out by the military, so now they were just resuming authority and sort of continuing to protect their own interests. But you have a new element enter the stage by the 1990s, and that's the drug trade. That in the early 90s, the drug trade takes off, especially from Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia. And at first, they'll transport it overseas to Mexico and then bring it in that way, or just straight into the United States by boat. But as Mexico's government begins to crack down on the drug trade in the 1990s, and especially the 2000s, that overland route shifts to Central America. So that you have now these enormously profitable commodities that are highly illegal and with a lot of violence attached to them, entering into an area that once again has not a very strong state, weak institutions, police institutions that at best are weak and at worst are corrupt, and it sort of opens the door to all of this kind of, it throws another wrench into the works of these already volatile areas, right? And so these are all of the factors that really lead us up to how and why you have this increased migration to the United States, right? These are the very long-term causes of triangle migration. Because a lot of these root causes, again, going back to the colonial period in many regards, have not been addressed. So that when Guatemala will have a Truth Commission report at the end of its civil war, it's actually backed by the United Nations because they're sort of impartial observers. And the United Nations Truth Commission report says the violence in Guatemala has its origins in inequalities going back to the colonial period, and sort of the masses being kept as labor for a handful of elites. And the result then is, as you can see in this chart, that some of the poorest countries in Latin America, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Bolivia, rival them in terms of poverty. So you have these countries with great poverty, a government that's unresponsive to them. They look north to the United States, and there's the promise of wealth there. And it's not even necessarily wealth that we would think of. There's an excellent movie from the 1980s called El Norte that's about two Guatemalan, a brother and sister, escaping the violence to go to the United States. And part of the thing it does is sort of plays on different nodes of expectations of wealth. Because they think, oh, everyone drives a car. We've seen their television programming. Everybody has a car. We'll even have cars. And they get there, and they're shown this completely squalid apartment they're basically being taken advantage by a local who's got an apartment complex that he keeps in terrible condition, and they think it's amazing. Right? That we're horrified by this, but for them, it's got a toilet that flushes. That this image of the United States and the promise of wealth, that you can get there and get a job and be safer, more secure, that there is a stronger state here, the police forces are stronger and less corrupt, and you can make money and maybe improve your conditions, right? So there's already this pull factor from the United States, but there's going to be one more factor that sort of complicates this and helps explain why it is the way it is, and that is the MS-13, right? Gang violence. And it's not just that it gets tied to the drug wars, but that the MS-13 in particular is an example of these sort of complex networks back and forth between the United States, because originally the MS-13, we think of it as a Salvadoran gang founded in the United States. Because in the 1980s, you had with that civil war going on, you have a lot of Salvadoran refugees flee to the United States, entering legally and without documentation. And Los Angeles will be one of the major places where they congregate. They move into the poorer areas of the city, and they face violence from other gangs operating in those poorer areas. And so in response, they form their own gang to basically protect the Salvadorans against other ethnically and culturally defined gangs, and they become a strong gang. And once the Salvadoran Civil War ends, we deport a bunch of them. But the problem is El Salvador doesn't have that strong state, and so you have, if anything, it strengthens MS-13, because now they're not under the US police force's gaze or the FBI's gaze. They go back to El Salvador and begin to recruit heavily and grow, and if you don't join them, you face violence. Right? And this occurs throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s. It doesn't really fully become visible until the late 2000s. But this process is also unfolding, right? So it's not just that you have this crushing poverty occurring in the Northern Triangle, but you also have this violence that, if anything, has been facilitated by this complicated immigration policies on the United States, the deportation. So that you can see in the last 10 years, or 15 years at this point, the murder rates jumping. So just from 2004 to 2015, and you can sort of trace exactly how MS-13 really gets pulled in response to Salvadoran failures, policies failures. And so this is right. If we think about this question of migration, then there's two ways to consider it, two factors that are not mutually exclusive. One is push factors to push people out of Central America, out of the Northern Triangle, and the other is these pull factors in the United States. So the United States offers greater security. The dollar is worth more. Even if you're paid below minimum wage, they can do more with it. Pushing them out of Latin America, out of the Northern Triangle, is the weak states. Oligarchical rule that hasn't ever really gone away, that continues to fail to address the needs of the people. Education, training, incomes. Violence, right? All of these elements, gang violence. The drug trade further destabilizing and adding to that violence. So there are these pull factors drawing people to the United States, the allure of what we could offer, whether it's real or not, the image of what we could offer. And then those very real factors they're experiencing on the ground, pushing them out. And when you look at news reports today, it seems like this is some massive phenomenon that's just erupted out of nowhere. But that's a bit of a misrepresentation by perspective, that when you consider the question of undocumented immigration as a whole, it peaked in 2007 at 12.2 million people. And of those 12.2 million people, 6.9 million were coming from Mexico, only 1.5 million from the Northern Triangle, and another 3.8 million from elsewhere. So the Northern Triangle was at the bottom of the list in terms of sort of sources of undocumented migration. And that will get reversed actually. 2007 is the peak because 2008 follows. And it turns out it's actually less effective living in the United States when our economy is collapsing than just staying back home. That wasn't, going to the United States for the dollar that you could send back home to help your family, not worth as much anymore. So you see it drop off a bit here. I believe it's the next slide. Yes. But, and by 2010, the number trying to enter from Mexico is less than 500,000. But while the numbers from Mexico drop, that's the moment at which the numbers in the Northern Triangle go up, especially since 2013. In 2007, the number of people trying to enter into the United States from the Northern Triangle is about 400,000. It increases to over 1 million by 2017, has continued to go up since then. And one of the things that makes them different from other forms of migrant travel is previous undocumented migrants, they tended to be young men coming looking for work, especially from Mexico, with the promise of an income. Families coming from the Northern Triangle are exactly that, families. Right? They're not coming necessarily for the economic allure that's there. They're coming to protect themselves. They're drawing from that experience of violence, the threat of violence, and any number of forms that I'll return to here shortly, and the promise of a more stable life. They're playing off the idea of the American dream that we ourselves advocate, right? Going all the way back to the 1800s, that if you just come here, you can make a name for yourself, and your kids can be better off than you were. So they're sort of following, in some regards, the motive that drives them to this country isn't so different from the motive that drove the Irish, or the Germans, or the British, all the way back to the Puritans. That there you can make a place for yourself and promise greater wealth for your subsequent generations of your family.
Question.
Yes?
I don't understand that graph. Is that people that have arrived home, or is it for a year?
This is from 1992 to 2017. So that's sort of how high it went up and then drops down to 10.5 million. And that's total. That's worldwide.
And how many countries is that?
All of them. All. Like, so whether that can be someone trying to enter the country without documentation across the border. That could be someone who is from India or China that came here on a visa, but that visa has expired, but they remain in the country. So that's all cases of undocumented migration.
Okay, thank you.
So you have this data sort of sitting here, right? That when we compare for all the migration and the notion of migrant caravans, right, is this boogeyman that makes it seem like it's an enormous phenomenon, but a little bit of numerical perspective matters here. That had been Mexican migration. This is the deportation rates, right? But how many are being caught and deported versus the Northern Triangle from the United States and from Mexico? And here you have the total numbers. That it's only recently, and I couldn't find a good graph of this, but in 2017 is when this first finally they sort of switched. That the Northern Triangle is just above Mexico in terms of migrants to the United States without documentation. So all of these are, right, first of all, let's sort of set the stage for this perspective, that this is an issue, but the notion that this is some sort of enormous tidal wave just overwhelming the country is, if you're in the media, I don't need to malign your profession, but right, if it bleeds, it leads. So the news stories aren't going to lead with puppies were born today. The news stories are going to lead with the migrant wave, right, coming into the country, because that's more interesting for news. So they're pushed here for these reasons, right? And again, the notion that it's families makes entire sense because it's issues like the murder rate in Honduras or in El Salvador rather, is 62 every 100,000 people, 42 per 100,000 in Honduras, 26 per 100,000 in Guatemala. All of Central America is just 25 in 100,000. Costa Rica is 4 in 100,000. Right, so these murder rates in those three countries are the highest of Central America, pushing families out. There have been efforts recently, and even in the 2000s and early 2010s, this wave doesn't take off because there are efforts to address that. You actually get elements of responsibility and accountability implemented in Central America. Guatemala will establish it's called CICIG, it's the Spanish, but it's the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala. And it basically looks at all of these cases of impunity that have remained in place where presidents or army officials or others had abused their power, whether it's through violence or corruption, and it holds them accountable. El Salvador puts a president in jail and another one flees because he's about to go to jail for embezzlement. That you start to have an effort to hold authorities responsible. That Efrain Rios Montt, who had been the president during that genocidal wave in the 80s, he's tried for genocide. It marks the first time in the world that a home country tried its ex-leader for genocide. Previous cases of genocide, Rwanda, Yugoslavia, etc., they had been done in an international court. Guatemala does it in a national court. The country says, you committed the act of genocide, you will face trial for this. So there's some hope, but by 2015 and 16, that hope's taken away. That the elites realize, oh my God, this anti-corruption campaign could come after me, and so they shut it down. The Salvadoran Congress shuts down efforts to investigate its own politicians any further. Well, we got one president, that's good enough. And so what you end up having is where there had seemed to be the promise of a representative government and a stable government, that's undone by 2015, 16, 17 in those three countries. And that's where we see that number skyrocket once again. I want to sort of, and I know we have, I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I want to, I do have this graph here too, the number of apprehensions. Because in all of this, we talked a lot about the Salvadorans, the Hondurans, the Guatemalans themselves and their efforts to migrate, and the reasons for migrating, and the conditions they face. And a lot of it is, I can't overstate the importance of violence, right? And it's not just gang violence, there's plenty of that, and I'll have an example here shortly. But it's other forms of violence. That sexual violence against women in those areas is very high, and the culture of impunity means there's no real prosecution for it. So you have a lot of women with their children fleeing abusive husbands or abusive boyfriends or partners saying, I need to be in this country because I'm going to die if I stay there, right? That all of these people coming are seeking asylum rather than just employment. Yes, sir.
If you add up all of those years,
Mm-hmm.
that's a heck of a lot of people.
Yes.
What is the impact on those Northern Triangle countries? Every now and then, villages are empty.
Yeah.
Nobody's there. What's the future impact if they deplete their population?
It's a good question. It's profound, but at the end, not at the end of the day, but in part, that's where the failure of the political leadership to do anything about it is, right? If you have more education, that's for better jobs that you can bring into the country and keep people there, right? They're sort of shooting themselves in the foot over this to protect their privilege and their wealth. In the long term, this could turn out disastrously for them. But
It's kind of like the people in those countries need to fix their country.
Yeah.
The good people need to stay there
Yes.
and make it right.
And we haven't helped because in some regard, right, that there's a coup in Honduras in 2009, and we're real quiet. We aren't involved in it. But we sort of sit back and just wait and see how it turns out before we decide. And eventually you're like, yeah, that's a coup. We disapprove of it, and we're going to not help you out. But only after every other Latin American country you've said, that's a coup, and we're not dealing with that president. And we say, we're not dealing with you. And several months later, we start pricing. So, you want to do some trade? Yes, ma'am.
I was going to point out that I believe that the people that are coming have more gumption and more drive, and they're leaving behind the people
Right.
that are hopeless.
Yes. Or because, you know, you leave the gangs behind and the police, they can shoot themselves to death. So they put you got out of Dodge. But the other thing that sort of makes this an issue that we haven't really explored yet is what's going on this side of the border, right? Because there's some real problems here that we have, some real struggles of our own. There are plenty of solutions and diagnoses we can offer for countries, or that these countries can come up with to solve the problems, to address those push factors. But there's some real issues on our side as well. So for example, we have an immigration system that's in desperate need of reform. There's not been a serious immigration reform policy since 1986 with Reagan, where things were so bad that Reagan and the Democratic-led Congress said, we need a bill to fix this, and they passed one, right? But since then, there has been nothing. When 50,000 unaccompanied minors, children under the age of 18, on their own, 50,000 of them entered the country in 2014, the president requested $4 billion from Congress to build new detention facilities, to increase surveillance and border patrol, and to hire more immigration officials and judges, but Congress refused along partisan lines. Right? That where in the 80s you could have these efforts in sort of bipartisan effort to reform the system, it's sort of fractured at this point where we can't, even when there's a very real issue, 50,000 kids on their own, if nothing else, get them a shelter. But the request for funding, and also, it wasn't just let's feed them and let them in the country, but it's also I want to patrol the border, but Congress says no. Additionally, our asylum system is ill-equipped. It's only prepared for a few thousand cases a year. In 2010, there were 28,000 asylum cases filed in the United States. In 2017, it's 143,000.
So,
Yes.
of all those, what percent can we say are asylum?
We don't have the exact numbers on that, but it's increasing. And this is another issue too, is the way asylum law works both in the United States and internationally, is if you're going to seek asylum, you have to get into the country first. This is the other reason why they're coming here, is because they can't request asylum from Honduras or El Salvador or Guatemala or even Mexico. They can't hang out in Juarez or Tijuana and say, we're here, but can we get asylum in there, please? Because by US law and international law, you can't ask, like this is why when you think of Cuban migrants in the 80s, getting on boats, landing on shore and saying, I seek asylum, you have to be there to do it. So this sort of escalates the matter further. Yeah, from Cuba. And even so, we've tried to ameliorate this on the other direction too, right? That you have things like the Central American Free Trade Agreement that is formed in the 2000s, and the goal was theoretically to boost the productive sector and strengthen the role of trade and production in Central America, so there would be that kind of industry and that kind of job development that would keep people there. But back to the irresponsible elites there, they just sort of, they create a system where it just continues to profit them further and further without offering an improvement in life for a majority of the population. And so since 2017, and this is where the other major shift happens, right? It's because once we elect a new president, our policies have fundamentally transformed on this front. So since 2017, we've curtailed our legal rights to asylum in this country. We have also, I think we've all seen them, back to the cheerful news, right? The images of children in detention centers, the kids dying of the flu or what have you in unsafe conditions, and increased the number of raids on immigrants, some of whom have been in the US for decades. And this does have a profound effect, right? I'm not saying whether that's the right or wrong policy, but it's not an adequate long-term issue that's going to resolve the question of migration to the United States. So that, for example, this is just last week, I don't know if anyone saw this, there was a report issued that found that of the 138, a number of Salvadorans, 138 Salvadorans we had deported, and they tried to stay here saying, I will get killed back home. I refuse to join a gang. They've taken over my town. I've tried to fight them, stop them, not fight them physically, but just sort of speak out against them, the civil disobedience path. If I go back, I'll get killed. 138 of them have been. Another 70 plus have been at least tortured or abused by the police or by drug gangs since being deported. Of those deportations, only 4 of them came before 2017. So again, that wave, that crest of migration isn't an imagined violence. They're not using, this isn't a made up excuse to sort of say, aha, this is how they will let me into the country. I'll believe that they're going to kill me. They are going to get killed, right? That a lot of these people really are escaping violence. That there's a case in this study, Walter T. and Gasper T., their anonymity was necessary. They were in the United States for 5 years, fleeing El Salvador so they weren't going to be forcibly recruited by a gang. They were sent back, ripped from their beds, and beaten by police for 3 days. Police claimed they'd be charged with gang violence, but they never were. And calls to expel, and this is where I'll sort of wrap up and open the floor, is calls to expel migrants are unrealistic because there are over 9 million in the United States. To expel them isn't just going to, the countries probably aren't ready for that many people to come back, but that's 9 million people in our labor force and who pay taxes, right? Whether it's through Social Security or even if they have somehow gotten through all of that and are managing to pay nothing into the federal system, the sheer act of buying stuff at Brookshire's with the sales tax generates local revenues in ways that to have 9 million tax-paying individuals suddenly flee the country or forced out of the country, that's not going to help us either. Additionally, many of them have been here for years or decades, and some, especially younger children or younger adults, they have no connection to their home. If you have a family that came here in 1992 and have kids here and raise them, they don't even know the language perhaps. There's no way for them to go back home. There's no infrastructure in place for them. And so this is a very fraught issue. I'm not going to have the answers to all these questions. Like I'm not the solutions to these issues, right? But this is a factor that has very deep roots that are only, it's sort of this iceberg effect, except we just discovered there is an iceberg. But underneath the surface, yes, it seems like a lot of people are entering this country without documentation. That can be a real issue. But it's also a problem exacerbated by the push factors that have historical roots of weak states, violence, instability, inequality in Central America, and the pull factors of the U.S. drawing them in even while our immigration system is ill-equipped for that. And this is why it's such a fraught issue today, and a very complicated one. And that's sort of where I will wrap up and open the floor to questions.
Kind of a comment, but also question. The murders that are happening in a triangle, the article said that 70% of the weapons are coming from the United States.
Yes. Directly or indirectly, a bit of both. Yeah.
And they had a raid in Mississippi on the Koch brothers chicken processing.
Yeah.
And the coach company was, what are we going to do? They've taken all the workers.
Right.
Your chart said that when the jobs were not there, people returned to their country.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that, no jobs and no undocumented. I think one of the reasons why we are in the state we are is the biggest lobby to Congress in the United States is business.
Yes.
And the profit margin off of these basically slave labor is so huge that if it's so huge that you're never going to have the companies to stand up and do the right thing and to say, look, let's make these people legal.
Yeah.
They're our workers. These 6 million undocumented in Texas, they're not dying on the streets,
Mm-hmm.
Like they are in the Triangle. They're living pretty good because they've got a salary.
Right, and this actually raises an interesting issue too. I was actually just reading a book on this morning. It's for those interested, it's by a woman named Deborah Kang, and it's called The INS on the Line. But it's basically, she's looking at sort of the formation of the Border Patrol and the Immigration Naturalization Services from 1917 and World War I up to the 1950s. And sort of points out that you have even all the way back to the Bracero program, where you have these competing, it's the number of complicated factors just on the U.S. immigration side. So that you could have federal policy saying you must do it this way, but you have local businesses saying that's going to kill us. And then you have Border Patrol agents trying to sort of figure out how do we negotiate these two. And by the 1950s, they sort of create this more, I'm using her words here, aggressive approach to law enforcement on the border. But that's not a straight line. They try that in the 20s, but then in the 30s you get these reform movements that say that's a bad idea. We need to try these other mechanisms. And then you have the Bracero program, and coming out of that, they sort of return to this more aggressive approach to law enforcement. But you're absolutely right that a recurring motif in these tensions is local businessmen and local and increasingly large corporations and agro-industry lobbying Congress, who's then trying to change immigration policy that the Border Patrol doesn't like. And you've even had recent real-world examples of this, right? So people would say, well, if you just, I'm sure you've all heard the argument, if we just hire locals. And the farms say they won't do the job. And we had a real-world experience of this in Alabama in 2011, where they passed the strictest anti-immigration law of any state in the country that could. And all of a sudden, there's a lot of tomatoes and vegetables rotting in fields because farmers can't get, all their workforce just left, either because they were undocumented or they were just afraid. You had actually a lot of people who were documented, but didn't want to be looked at as, I look like one, so they're going to come after me. So they just left the neighboring states. And the farm operators were offering double and triple the salaries, the wages. And the non-Hispanics were saying, no, that's difficult work. I'm not doing it. You can't pay me enough to do that work. So there have been real world experiences, like when they say we need to have a stricter policy that just goes after them. Alabama tried it. They undid it because it was such a disaster for their agriculture. Yes, ma'am.
In addition to the overall cuts in ICE, has there been enough to the asylum, addition to the asylum? It looks like the need for asylum now is greater than just the...
No, it absolutely is. And ICE has sort of complicated things, right? And we treat ICE like it's sort of this time. ICE has only been around since 2003. It's a product of the Patriot Act. So we don't have to, again, this isn't saying abolish ICE or anything like that, but the notion we can't do this without ICE. We did it without ICE till 2003 without any trouble. We know how to do immigration border patrol without ICE. They aren't the linchpin of this mechanism. But you do have an increased number of asylum cases. And you do have one group that I don't mention and that the book doesn't mention, but I know is especially a bit on the rise in the last 18 months or so, are lawyers or academics or advocates, human rights advocates, trying to help with these asylum cases, not because they're not open border advocates. They're just saying, this system is so backed up, I have expertise in this, I'll go down and help where I can. Right? So I've had colleagues not at UT but in academia who spend their summers basically saying, look, I'm a law professor who happens to specialize in exactly this. I get paid enough as a law professor, I'll do this pro bono, so we can try to get the system, get some of these backlog cases addressed. Because it's not a guarantee, applying for asylum isn't a guarantee you'll get it, but they're at least trying to ensure that hearings can happen so we can get this system sort of cleaned up a bit. Yes, sir, and then back over here.
one chart you don't have up there is what it costs us.
Yeah.
What it costs us, and also the diseases that they bring in.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the coronavirus, that's elsewhere. But even if there are, because certainly the conditions in the camps are not ideal for cleanliness and illness. But those are diseases, I mean, the flu is the flu. They don't even have to bring it here. But also not having, letting people sleep in squalid conditions. And there was one report I saw where someone had gone into one of these detention camps, and it's a bunch of women in a cell with their children, and there is a toilet and a sink, but the sink is on top of the toilet, like where the toilet tank is, that's where the sink is, and the sink wasn't working, which meant their only water was the toilet bowl. So that we're sort of fostering unsanitary conditions as it is, and the question of disease on transportation, that's not from anywhere, it just spreads quickly everywhere. Yes, sir, and then over here.
It seems to me, I came here thinking this is going to be a talk about the Northern Triangle, and it segued into the immigration problem. It seems like the immigration problem is just a special case of a deeper, more complicated problem that's been going on for centuries.
Absolutely. No, multiple centuries, right? So the Northern Triangle's conditions on its own, that's got deep historical roots. But then the concern for the U.S., and this is sort of why I think it ended up in the great decisions this year, was they sort of said the United States and the Northern Triangle, and because all of these conditions on their own are bad enough, but it also, it's not just something that's happening over there or down there. It's got direct implications, even to your point, like absolutely the cost of this is enormous. Another place where reform could help is sort of streamlining processes that aren't so bureaucratic and therefore costly, or making it, even if we could just streamline it so that the camps that we keep people in while they're waiting their trials, if there are fewer of them, because that's got a maintenance cost. So yeah, it's absolutely a bigger set of problems to the Northern Triangle, but with problems that have real impact on the United States as well. Yeah.
Well, I want to say that I watched, as I'm sure most of the people in here did, President Trump's State of the Union message. And I remember that one of the guests that was invited was the family of this family in California, where some family member was murdered by one of these people. May not have been a drug dealer, but he was a criminal. And it seems like appeals to that is kind of simplistic, that obviously he was playing to people's emotions.
Yeah.
And while I'm just as emotional about it as the next someone gets murdered as the next person, I see that it's really a more complex problem. Even building a wall from Brownsville to Tijuana seems like just a special part of a more complex problem.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you raised the issue, because there is a sort of stereotype, right, the crime that they bring. But again, it's not like there's 0% crime, because point me to the population when there's 0% crime, I'm going to say you're fudging your numbers. But the fact that it's mostly families, and there are studies out there, I don't have the exact data, but the overall murder rate amongst those who are here without documentation is lower than the national murder rate in the United States, because they have a lot more to lose. And no one wants to go to jail, but if they're caught committing crime, they get deported back to where they were, where their lives are at risk in the first place, and they lose their better income and stability. So when you look at the crime rates and the murder rates or the number of murders and crimes committed, felony crimes committed by undocumented or even legal immigrants, it's lower than the national average. Yes, sir, and then over here, and then back there.
I'm curious, how many individuals from the Northern Triangle countries are allowed to legally immigrate into the U.S. each year?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know, because and this is the other tricky part that sort of further complicates things. Well, there have been a quota system, but the rules keep changing on a monthly basis. I was talking to somebody on the immigration. I have a friend who works in immigration offices, and they said basically part of the reason they're dealing with the backlog is because at the local offices, they keep getting new rules on almost monthly basis. And so they can't even really keep up with the policy and the process there, and that's further complicating things that they don't know, like they're told, do numbers, wait, don't do numbers. Okay, do numbers, but just from these countries. Oh no, we're sorry, do numbers from all these countries, right? Even the new, the latest decree that like it just added 7 new countries to the can't come here list. And none of them are the Northern Triangle, but they're, immigration, it's not just offices aren't just dealing with immigration from the Northern Triangle to the United States or entering across the border. It's all immigration. Like, if you came here legally on one of those visas and you've got to apply for your green card, they have to go, and you're from Bangladesh, you have to go to the office in Dallas that's also dealing with all these rule changes.
Well, even the people who live here for 20 years have to
Yeah.
renew their thing.
Yeah, until you get citizenship, yeah, green cards are not permanent, you just have to keep renewing them. Yes, sir.
Show me the money. Money is in the drugs. Legalize it, but give it to tobacco companies, because we've seen a demonstration of what the drug companies will do with OxyContin.
Well, and this raises an interesting thing, because I didn't even get into great depth in the drug trade, but the legalized issue is interesting, because most of the drugs that are being brought into the United States from across the Northern Triangle, it's not marijuana, that had been mostly Mexico, it's cocaine. But Bolivia did an interesting experiment on this where they legalized coca leaf production. They said you can't just come in and crop dust our coca plants anymore, because coca leaves are not a drug. Coca leaves are tea leaves or coffee. It's like, that's their effect. You can have coca tea in South America, and it's just like, oh man, post lunch, getting sleepy, have some tea real quick. It's the much like poppy seeds to heroin, so coca leaves to cocaine. So what Bolivia did was they basically said, you can grow it, but if you dare, then we'll come after you with the whole, like that. It's not the leaf itself that's the criminal activity. It's manufacturing into cocaine, and the amount of cocaine coming out of Bolivia dropped almost to zero. Peru and Colombia became the new centers of it because Bolivia had said, yeah, you can grow it legally, we don't care. And that's also sort of, it stops making it, once you make it so you can make cocaine out of it, it's not nearly as profitable to make coca leaves. Yes, sir. And I'm sorry, actually over here, and then I'll come back over here because you had your hand up a while.
Yeah, so you've got, it seems to me like you've got two sets of problems. You've got the short-term problems and you've got the long-term problems. Short-term problems being those of immigration, the drugs, the weapons, that kind of stuff. The long-term problems are the ones that have to do directly with the governments of the Northern Triangle. What do you do about those? How?
Yeah.
What's being done?
So this is a sticky wicket, as they would say, right? Because on the one hand, you can't just tell other countries do this now, but there are mechanisms so you can use financial rewards or punishments for it. But even it's too early to say how this has worked out. But Trump has gotten one of the, I believe it's Guatemala. The Guatemalan government has agreed to try to monitor, basically, not reform its system, but to be more attentive to outflows of citizens and try to develop programs to keep them in. This has just been the last couple months, so we have no way of knowing, like, is it going to work, or are they going to do it seriously? But there is this need for this kind of, there has to be reform at a number of places. There has to be reforms and transformations in societies there. There have to be legal reforms here. It's a very fraught, complicated issue. Even back to your comment about the legalizer, right? The U.S.'s approach to the drug war has very much been, it's sort of this perverse Adam Smithian economics, where Latin America says, if you just quit demanding it, we wouldn't have it. And the United States says, if you would just quit supplying it, we wouldn't have it. And no one's sort of saying like that it's supply and demand, not supply or demand, right? So this is, another, like, there are even structural issues we can do to try to address the fact that it's got these deeper roots as well. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Yes?
Okay, starting with AOS, I'm thinking about other international organizations, the UN,
Yeah.
Monetary Fund, World Court. Any of those ever tried to help the
So
triangle
the
countries?
UN has, like, actually that's the CICIG in Guatemala, that was a UN initiated project. And they got Guatemala on board because they couldn't just impose it on them, right? It's not the UN's authority. They basically negotiated with Guatemala, convinced them this is a good idea, but the problem is now that Guatemala leads are so worried about what could happen to them, so they decided to get rid of it. the UN's power is finite. Over here, and then 2 people. Yes, ma'am.
I thought that there was a program under Obama that Trump canceled that was trying to help for the immigration.
There may have been. I don't know the specifics on that.
Because I can remember the reporter asking, well, why was it canceled?
Right. And some of these policies, to be clear, are cross, right? The detention camps were there before under Obama as well. He requested that money for more of them. But what has changed is there are a couple of new wrinkles to that policy. So amongst them is the separation of families is a new element of that policy. The intent, the sort of concentration of people in those camps is a new element. That there had been people before, but the overcrowding wasn't quite so extreme.
What are the original ones though, unparented?
A lot, but not all. It was just undocumented. You could just have families too. And the Obama administration was also deporting, but that has also escalated in the past couple of years. Yes, ma'am.
I was in Guatemala, Mexico border 3 years ago. Mexico was crying at that time over immigrants to the country of Guatemala.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to just walk across or crowd in the border.
Yeah.
And they've done, that's included in what they had to do.
Yes, yeah, Mexico has also begun, under sort of pressure from the United States, it's begun patrolling its border a little more closely, but this comes back to another issue that Central America is dealing with as well, which is non-reliable police forces. Either those in cahoots with drug gangs or those corrupt. And that comes back to another structural, again, there is no thread you can call on where suddenly all comes, to solve the problems, because police aren't paid real well in Mexico, so that makes working with the cartels profitable because they pay you more, and now you've opened up this whole can of worms. Yes, sir.
Realistically, if you look down the road 20, 30, 20 years, do you think there's going to be a change where those governments will be what you might call a normal government that looks after their people?
I wouldn't rule it out. In part because you have seen some changes in their local politics. So for example, some of those guerrilla groups that were fighting civil wars have become political parties. They've abandoned the guerrillas, the armed struggle is not the way, we want to work within the system now. And they've been elected. So which has opened the system a little bit, right? And when you think of that destabilization, that it's only in 1996 for Guatemala. I mean, we're only 28 years out in the case of El Salvador, 24 in the case of Guatemala. We're only 11 years out from a coup in Honduras. So I don't want to say it's all just, and we've had stability, there haven't been civil wars in 2 of the 3 countries, or coups in 2 of the 3 countries in 30 years. And that's a pretty good run for them so far. So there is the opportunity, I think, for the systems to continue to, I'm trying to find the right word here, transform and be more open to different voices that represent people more, and to different policies and structures and more checks and balances. But who knows, because I haven't even had a chance to read it. Just the other day, when the President of El Salvador was sending the military to Congress. There hasn't been a coup yet. That was yesterday afternoon. I haven't had a chance to read up on it.
Impressive.
Yes, sir.
Just to piggyback on Show Me the Money a while ago, I read that about a dozen or so soldiers that were sent to the border are now being prosecuted for trafficking and drug dealing. And statistically, most of the drugs come through the border crossings. And then I also read that Border Patrol also has a lot of problems in its ranks with money, but also that about 4 or 5 of the senior people in the Border Patrol have left. So there's this whole vacuum. And also, just to finish, the article said that Obama's administration sent $1.5 billion over to the Triangle to work on social problems rather than to support corrupt regimes.
Yes.
And dollars there's being spent on the border wall and the Border Patrol personnel and whatnot. Imagine if those billions were invested in social programs that can undergird the people to help to raise them up, so that
Right.
they can elect
Yeah.
legitimate.
And that's an important element, but that comes back to that earlier issue someone raised. It also requires political will on the ground. And that's where you run into another set of obstacles. Yes, ma'am.
The League of Women Voters has been trying to get people interested in immigration reform.
Mhm.
I remember when we had the Speakers Bureau here in Tyler, I was one of them. We went around and talked to organizations. We talked to our congressman, trying to, and Ralph Hall, who was our congressman, he was congressman at that time, he said, Kathleen, you're fighting a losing battle because nobody wants to spend any money for IMS. I was working in a federal court then. I worked with naturalization. IMS allows we need money.
Yeah, I believe it. And this, I mean, again, back to that book, guys, this has been a struggle for the INS for a long time, is getting money to be able to provide the degree of, yeah. Any other questions?
Nobody says anything about first rate and jobs.
Right.
In the home economy, the rural, the more rural, you know, the poverty on the edge of life.
Yeah.
We're talking about in the United States or in their original country?
I think it would apply to both. Different degrees of poverty. And poverty in the United States is different than poverty in El Salvador or Honduras. But yeah, I mean, the demographic rates on both, you're absolutely right. There's not a lot of efforts to address the sort of disadvantageous positions that rural populations in general find themselves in.
Let's go